we're so lucky to partner with our friends at Mentra on today's conversation. As the most diverse generation, whether it be in difference of ability or thought or background, we all are able to contribute our unique strengths to whatever environment we're in. And Mentra believes that no matter your ability, you can be a contributor to any organization or place that you put your mind to. So we're excited to bring you this conversation, and let's dive in. Kicking us off, do you feel like we get to choose who we are? We are the summation of our identities, but at the same time, there's so much that goes into that intersection of who we are. We don't choose how we're perceived. And therefore, I'm just kind of left thinking about, are our identities truly who we are, or simply what other people want us to be?
No, I don't in some ways think that we can decide who we are. Let's say you're a kid that's 12 years old. And for me, that was, I think, something I dealt with, where if a parent or a teacher, for example, calls you shy, I think outside of identity labels, but someone calls you shy when you're a child, once you have that, it's almost a struggle sometimes once you're labeled that way, even if it's not even true necessarily, you all of a sudden are kind of coming up against that label, comparing yourself to it. Am I shy? Am I not shy? Over time, especially once I went to college, I was able to kind of change that. And I realized, wait, maybe I'm not shy, even though people have been telling me my whole life that I am. It's really important to acknowledge that there are, especially in our upbringings, especially with children, if people do kind of give you labels, it can really influence you in your life for a long time unless you're able to transverse that. So
I think we get to choose, only because I think identity and experience are different things. You ascertain or you attest to your own identity, but you're experiencing how people identify you. Someone might, on the outside looking at me, have identified me in a certain way, and then they'll treat me a certain way, and then that experience is what I have. But that's not who I am. I know how I live through my life and who I am, my personhood. And that's why I say yes, because I think we have more agency than we like to give ourselves credit for. That we get to determine who we get to be in this life at every stage.
I would say no. I agree with what you're saying about we get to choose who we want to be. Sure, I can choose to be a nicer person, but I, as a woman, don't choose to be followed around when I go grocery shopping or when I'm at the airport or if I decide to go out at night. Those are things that I don't choose, but that happen to me because I'm a woman, and I feel like women don't have that many choices in life. It's you're a mother or you're a bitch or you're dead. I mean, when you look at fairy tales and you look at the way that we have been made out to be in pop culture, it's that's who we are. We're sexy or we're mothers. And that's not a choice. Although ideally in an ideal society outside of the patriarchy, I would answer to your question, yes. Mm-hmm. We can choose who we are. We get to be who we want to be. But under the material circumstances that we live under, no.
Me, I yes and no. I think there are certain aspects of yourself that you can't change. And I don't think you should want to. Being queer, being Hispanic are things that I will never change, but how I feel about them is different. It's the experience. My experience of being Hispanic is always very different from someone else. Mm-hmm. So I can change aspects of myself and how I see myself and how I perceive and react to others. I think the way we react is really important. And so even though you're in this space where you can't control things, you still have agency over how you feel about those identities, who you surround yourself with. Because we always say our environment and our parents and people who help people who raised us have really shaped who we are. And that's really true. But the moment we can have that independence, we can be around who we want. And of course, different from when you're followed or stuff like that. But when you have the agency of who you can be around, finding those positive people you can be around, I think can shape you. And it really also can sometimes bring out the best in you. And that's why you may be a good person, but if you surround yourself with people doing questionable things, you might fall into that. So
are there pieces about your identity that you absolutely hold true, and maybe some traditional labels that are a part of who you are, you identify with? And on the flip side, are there pieces of yourself that you don't necessarily identify with or have been put at the forefront of your identity because of labels?
I mean, I hold very dear to my heart my womanhood and the fact that I'm a woman, and not in a individual, I identify what it means to be a woman for me, but in a very much more traditional, I am a woman, and that has shaped my experience through my 21 years of life. There are other parts of my identity. For example, I'm Jewish, and growing up in a Muslim country, I was bullied a lot for it. And so that was something that I felt like I had to hide, versus when I came to America and I went to, you know, the JCC and like was around a very prideful Jewish community. There was definitely a difference there, but difficult for me to divorce myself from these multiple parts of my identities, especially knowing that like some might be more hated than others.
And when someone asks you who you are, what do you say first? Like, how do you describe yourself?
Who am I? Honestly, I would say I'm an international student right now, studying international affairs, because that's kind of where I want to get into. So in a professional setting, I feel like that's the first thing I would say.
And what is the setting where you would say, you know, you're a Jewish woman, or other aspects of your identity that you just spoke about?
In more social settings or settings like this, where I feel like it's important to have conversations of identity and of what does it mean to take on an identity or to take on a label, which I don't really like that word, hot take. I feel like the word label is not the right word to talk about identity. Label has a direct tie to capitalism, and the word label is originally like the label you put on your clothes. Are we that far into capitalism where we're commodities and we're taking on these labels? So as a woman, because of my woman label, I'm going to be advertised tampons. And, you know, as a man, you're going to be advertised shaving cream. And it's like, have we come that far where we need to like wear something that advertisers can take on and direct towards us?
I've never thought about that before. That's fascinating. Do y'all feel like our commodities or our identities have been commodified?
Absolutely. I never saw it that way. I didn't think of label as that, but I do think label can be problematic. It's not a label. I feel like a label is something that someone puts on you. It's your identity. It's what you have come to realize. Who cares if you're born with it? It's something you identify with, and it's your choice. It's not a label someone gave you, or like, I label this. It's like, no, this is who I am. It's not just something I decided to just take on. I mean, maybe you did that day, but you know what? That's where your trajectory is. And I think that's amazing. And so I think sometimes I see that our identities are commodified. Like when you see these companies that really do not support Pride, but they got their logos rainbow in June. And I think good for them for taking one step. Then you hear about the horror stories of these companies, how they treat LGBTQ or queer people. And it's like, yeah, you're commodifying the experience because you want more sales. And I think even I'm seeing like queer people chosen for different brand deals. I'm like, so you just chose them because they're trendy or they have these identities, reducing yourself again to the label rather than you're a great spokesperson for it. You're an authentic person rather than, and I think also when you do that, especially when people get a lot of deals, they're becoming the face of it. I don't think that's fair because you're one person and you're not respecting the community's intersectionality, and like every experience is really valid. I have a digital magazine where I interview people about mental health, and we talk about identities, if it's sexual assault or if it's being part of a gang. Different things that these people experience, or going to jail. A lot of different things that have put them on a path of where they are now of clarity.
Do you feel like there are pieces of your identity that you don't identify with?
Not that I don't identify, but of course the focus is not on those identities. If I'm in the office and it's a safe place, I don't think about it.
Is our identity just a summation of those experiences, or is it more on top of that?
I don't know if this is a hot take, but I kind of separate myself from the identity conversation oftentimes, I'm surprised, because I don't see identity, I see it as clerical and administrative. Like you do an intake for like a primary physician, they ask you for your SOGI, your information to social identify yourself. And so for me, I don't say I identify something, I am something. So I don't use that type of language, like I identify as this. No, I am this. This is who I am. This is my lived experience. And I use that language, again, more about lived experience than about identity focus. And for me, the things that I understand my humanity through, what I navigate the world through, is through like I'm a person of faith, I'm a person, a Black person, I'm a trans person, I'm a femme person. Femininity, feminist, separate from womanhood, very different. Like kind of idea of like feminism versus womanism, Black women, feminism, things like that. So for me as a Black trans femme, like feminism or Black trans feminism is a very different type of feminism, which is a bit more, it's a different type of feminism engaging.
So if you think of like Black trans feminism as something very different from feminism.
Yes.
Then how, because I align more with like radical feminist point of views.
Yes.
And so those point of views are much more all-inclusionary and we talk about, you know, white women but also Black women and
Yes.
South Asian women, aligning your views with Black trans feminism. How do you feel in relation to like women outside of that, and do you feel like it would kind of exclude you from being able to politically align with
No.
feminists?
Oh no, I think it's just more sort of like a governing principle, because I think the Kabahi River Collective, I forget the last mayor of New York City, his wife was part of that movement out of the upstate New York, and a Black women feminist poet collective. They talked about when you do movement work around centering people at the farthest on the margins in our society, you actually build solutions that support everyone. People who are living in like the margin of the margins, we actually can build out programs, resource technologies that can support everyone. So as I think about your question of like radical feminism, it's more so because for me, being in spaces where people said they're radical feminists, they actually weren't. I oftentimes kind of question radical, like how radical is radical.
Because sexuality and gender can be so fluid, I don't know where I stand sometimes.
It changes.
You're right. So I can go like,
yeah,
say I identify as bisexual, I'm like, oh, tomorrow, no. But I'm never straight. It's always bisexual or gay. So it's always interesting how like your identities do change, and based on the experience and like how also the terminology can change. But I also think like as terminology changes, I don't think your identity changes. And that's just kind of how I feel. Like sometimes like even when I say I'm bisexual, it's what I've known as bisexual for a long time. Then when I start hearing pansexual, it's like, well, that is encompassing, but that's already how I feel as a bisexual person. I'm not changing how I've set myself for like 10 years because of that, because you decide to change the terminology and be more inclusive now. And I think I question the queer space because like I do not feel comfortable in the queer space because it is very like monolithic.
Yeah.
I think like you can go to queer events and like you see a lot of the same type of people. And also like they're inaccessible a lot of the times. There's not even like ramps at some of these events. I'm like, I don't need that, but I'm still really cognizant of people with disabilities that literally can't be here because of how this space was designed. It's really problematic. I wish people were more aware of that.
There's sometimes a pressure around each label, like sometimes stereotypes or exact definitions that we kind of get into with each label. A lot of times that I think ignores the complexity of each human being. Also, who invents the labels? Like a lot of times these labels end up being, things that we don't necessarily completely align with. And so even though we're creating more, I think we're in a space now where we are understanding that there's complexity. But one solution is it'll create more labels. But I don't even know if like the labels actually, if that's the right direction to go in terms of like solving that issue.
And Neil, just to take you one step further, what are those pieces of your identity that you put at the front of who you are versus maybe things that are a part of who you are that aren't something that you label yourself as?
But I think some things unique about being Chinese, Indian, American is, one, I don't look like any of my family members at all. Like we all look different. Like a lot of times, like I'll walk into a store or a restaurant with my family and the people don't realize we're like one family, like we're all together. Another thing is like I never met anyone else with my quote unquote exact racial identity of being half Chinese, half Indian besides my younger brother. No one else I've ever met in person with the same identity. And I think part of being kind of like that half and half is you're never fully in one culture or the other. I never, like when I heard the term Asian American, that was never something I identified with. I definitely much more identify with the term like multiracial because of kind of the complexity of, having a light-skinned mother, dark-skinned father. And like, for example, if I was to like marry someone of the quote unquote same race, like would they be Chinese Indian? Well, I've never met anyone else like that. Like how do I even navigate that? Despite me saying I'm multiracial, I go take the SAT. And then there's like, it's like, okay, the only option there's no option for multiracial, at least there wasn't 7 years ago. So I'm like, I guess I'm Asian American. But I think the bigger thing is like, I'm also taking the SAT. Like, why am I paying so much time to thinking about like, which box to check?
Hey, it's Riley Martinez from the Conversationalist community. Thanks so much for watching our POVz episode on labels. The best part about TC is that we want to hear everyone's points of view, including yours. Just text the word labels to 1-877-222-1119 to get access to all things TC, and we hope to feature you on a future episode. See you next time!